Good evening and welcome. Tonight's journey is a quiet one. We won't rush. We won't fight any dragons. No one to impress. Just a single day inside the cold, echoing stone of a medieval castle. In our story tonight, you'll be mesmerized by how life was for the servants of a medieval castle nested in the corners of Scotland. The lord who owns the castle will not be important for our story. You won't be at the high table, you won't wear silk, you won't issue commands from a velvet chair, but you'll be walking the corridors where the fires are lit before dawn. Where the floors are swept by hands that ache. Where the sounds of clinking dishes and muttered orders echo through kitchens that no one ever shows in the stories. Because this isn't about kings and queens. This is about what happens in the quiet. Behind the curtains, after the feast, before the sun. And maybe, in some ways, this place won't feel so unfamiliar after all. Because even now, even in your life there are days where you move quietly. Work steadily. Watch others live loudly. And wonder if anyone sees what you carry. This story is for those moments. For the people who move through the background. Holding everything together. So before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Take a deep breath in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are? And where in the world are you listening tonight? It's always comforting to know that someone, somewhere, might be drifting off to sleep alongside you. And if you enjoy these gentle stories, these slow walks through forgotten places, please take a moment to like the video and follow this channel. That way, whenever you need to rest, you'll know exactly where to find us. Now close your eyes, if you haven't already. There's nothing to fix. Nothing to chase. Nowhere else to be. We're just going back in time to a place that still echoes if you know how to listen. Let the fire glow. Let the story begin. If you're here now, you might be tired. Not just the kind of tired that rests in the bones. But the kind that settles in the mind, the endless thinking, the buzzing thoughts, the stories your brain insists on telling long after the day is done. Here, you don't have to solve anything. You don't have to finish the video. You're allowed, in fact, you're encouraged to drift. It's still dark when Thomas wakes up, not early morning dark, not that cool, misty gray that hints at sunrise, but deep, curtain-pulled, cave behind your eyes kind of dark. The kind of dark where the fire has long gone out and the stone floor holds onto the cold like an old grudge that he doesn't open his eyes right away. What's the point? He already knows what's waiting. Straw in his hair, a cramp in his shoulder, and the same wool blanket that smells faintly of onions, smoke, and something that might once have been a goat. That there's a quiet groan from somewhere across the servants' room. Someone else stretching. Or regretting stretching. No one speaks, no one ever does. Because at this hour, no one's awake because they want to be, that they're awake because the castle demands it. Thomas shifts his legs out from under the blanket. The stone floor greets him with a solid, immediate hello of cold. It's the kind of cold that seeps straight into your bones and politely informs you that today will be exactly like yesterday, only a little stiffer. He pulls on his boots. One squeaks, the other is missing a heel. Both are older than he is. The first task? Fire. Always fire. Not for himself, of course not. There's no personal hearth waiting to be stoked. No breakfast nook. No ceramic mugs with little deer painted on the side. This is for the kitchen. For the stew. For the lords who never wonder what time the cooks got up. Thomas walks barefoot across the inner yard, stepping carefully over frozen mud and a chicken that somehow got out again. His breath fogs in the air. The stars are still out, smug and silent. Inside the kitchen, everything is still. The ashes from the night before are cold. He scrapes them into a dented copper pan, dumps them into the pit behind the chimney, then carefully stacks dry kindling like a puzzle he's solved 100 times. He leans down, breathes gently, coaxes the coal to catch. When the flame finally flutters to life, there's no cheer, no applause. Just a soft crack, a curl of smoke, and the faintest warmth on his hands. He doesn't smile. But the day has begun. So, picture this. It's early. Still dark. By now the kitchen's already warm with firelight, and he just moves. Bucket of water in one hand, broom in the other, another day. That's the thing about castle life, it doesn't wait for you to feel ready. No one asks if you slept well. No one checks in on your dreams. But Thomas has them. By the time the others arrive, the room is already heating. The main cook, Hal, storms in like a weather front, one eye squinting, apron already stained, and muttering something about turnips and curses. Hal doesn't yell. He mutters. Constantly. As if the vegetables are conspiring against him. Which, to be fair, the cabbages do seem to have an attitude this week. Thomas moves through it all without being told. He checks the barrels of oats, lines up the bowls, fetches water that is too cold and spoons that are too few. The castle kitchen isn't glamorous. It's crowded, loud, and smells like meat, onion, sweat, and sometimes, feet. But it runs. Like clockwork. If clocks had no parts and ran on stress alone. There are 10 people in the kitchen today, not counting Hal. 2 to chop. 1 to stir. 1 to carry firewood. 1 girl turned the spit. Her name's Edda and she swears the pig blinked at her this morning. Thomas doesn't argue. Everyone moves fast. No one speaks unless they have to. Because timing is everything. And if breakfast is late? It's not just the Lord who complains. It's the steward. And the steward has that face, the kind that makes you feel like you've failed history itself. Then come the bells. 1.2, 3. First bell, wake. Second bell, begin. Third bell, pretend you weren't already working for 2 hours. Thomas is 20. His back says 30. His hands say 50. But inside, when the kitchen goes quiet for a moment, just a flicker between chaos, he still dreams. Not big dreams. Not knight in shining armor stuff. Just a cottage. A warm one. A roof that doesn't leak. A goat that minds its business. A girl who doesn't mind burnt stew. A dinner table where no one expects him to stand and refill goblets all night. He imagines a life where no one calls for more broth, and the only bell that rings is the one tied to the front gate. Just in case a neighbor drops by with news or eggs or a loaf to trade. And maybe if you're listening to this in bed, phone tilted sideways, volume low, you felt the same thing. Because it turns out, whether it's 1347 or today, being 20 isn't so different. You want space. You want to feel like the world isn't already full. You want to try things. Mess up. Try again. You want someone who texts back or at least remembers how you take your tea. Back then, Thomas just wanted to avoid the steward's list of who failed today. Now? It's more like rent, traffic, unread emails, different worries. Same weight. But still, both versions of you, they want the same thing. To be happy. To be safe. To be free to imagine something softer. And isn't that enough? And yet somehow, even surrounded by people back then or now, it's easy to feel like you're drifting a little. Like you're visible, but not quite seen. Like you're in the room, but also not. Thomas felt it too. He served meals, took orders, scrubbed floors. Everyone knew his name, but no one really asked who he was. Not the lords. Not the steward. Not even the other servants most days. And today? Well, you might post something funny. Or kind. Or brave. And wait for a like. Or a comment. Or maybe nothing at all. You scroll past 100 faces. All smiling. All edited. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, and it probably doesn't, but it still stings a little, doesn't it? Not because you want attention, but because you just want to feel like someone notices the real you. The one who's tired but trying, the one who just wants to know they're not walking through this life completely unseen. And maybe that's why you're here tonight. Not just to fall asleep, but to be reminded even gently that someone, somewhere, hears you breathing. By mid-morning, the kitchen feels like a forge. The bread's been pulled from the oven, round, dense loaves with cracked tops and barley dust still clinging to the crust. The stew has settled into a low, fragrant simmer, thick with root vegetables and yesterday's meat. Somewhere near the back door, a duck is making trouble, and no one has time to stop it. Thomas carries a stack of trenches to the great hall, thick slabs of yesterday's bread, meant to serve as both plate and sponge. He lays them out along the long wooden table, each one slightly uneven but good enough. No one will thank him. He doesn't expect them to. The hall itself is massive stone walls lined with faded tapestries that once meant something. A lion here. A saint there. Now they're mostly just draft stoppers. The air smells faintly of beeswax, damp wool, and that one spot near the fire where someone spilled ale a week ago and no one's dared to clean it since. There's a rhythm to this work, and Thomas knows it by heart. The trenches go down first. Then the knives, dull but still sharp enough to ruin a hand. Pewter cups follow, smudged but dry. And then, the waiting. He stands near the edge of the hall with the others, just outside the line of sight. Not too close. Not too still. Ready to step forward the moment someone lifts a hand or sighs just loud enough to count as a summons. The nobles arrive all at once, as if they've been waiting just outside for their grand entrance. Furs and lace, leather boots freshly scraped clean by someone else's brush. They speak too loudly and laugh too quickly, like people trying to convince themselves they're having a better time than they are. One of them complains that the bread is harder than last week. Another asks why there's stew again, as if this were a tavern with options. A third asks for wine and then sniffs when he realizes it isn't imported from the southern coast. Thomas says nothing. He's learned that speaking is rarely worth the risk. It's a kind of theater, this whole routine, with the servants as stagehands, invisible until something breaks or spills. The guests eat and talk and gesture with greasy fingers, dropping bones onto the floor with the expectation that someone else will clean them up. Which, of course, Thomas will. To him, they're not villains, not really. Just people playing roles they never questioned. And in a way, that's worse. They don't even notice the play. As the meal drags on, Thomas lets his thoughts wander not too far, just to the edges. He stands by the door, hands folded behind his back, watching the flicker of torchlight across the stone. The voices blur into one another. Someone drops a goblet. Someone else starts singing off-key. A dog sneaks under the table and grabs a chunk of meat that had barely hit the floor. Thomas stays still. He thinks about the world beyond these walls, not the grand world of maps and wars and politics, but the smaller world. The one with hedgerows and market stalls. The one where people know your name and not just your use. He wonders how many steps it would take to walk out of this place and into that one. Not metaphorically. Literally. He's counted before, when the hall is quiet. It's about 600 paces to the far gate, another 100 to the orchard, and then the road that disappears into the hills. He's never followed it. Not all the way. But the idea is there a thread at the back of his mind, tugging. Not because he's miserable, but because he knows this can't be all there is. The afternoon has settled into its slow rhythm, the fire is fed, the stew is reduced, and the nobles are either napping or arguing in rooms lined with velvet and opinions. Thomas is sent to the upper hallway to deliver a folded cloth. No one says what for, just that the lady of the house requested it, and you don't ask questions when the request includes a name you're not supposed to say aloud. He walks the corridor alone. This part of the castle is different, quieter, better lit. The windows are taller, the rushes on the floor are newer, and the tapestries don't smell like they've been crying in a cellar. Someone must beat the dust out of them weekly. A luxury. He doesn't expect to see anyone. Servants don't belong up here for long. But just as he rounds the corner near the gallery, she appears. The lady. She isn't dressed for court, no jewels, no headpiece that needs a 3-hour anchoring ceremony. Just a deep green cloak, loose over her shoulders, and hair pulled back in a way that probably still took 2 maids to accomplish. She's holding a book. Or pretending to. Thomas stops walking. He lowers his head slightly. Enough to acknowledge without intruding. She pauses too. Just for a second. It's not dramatic. It's not romantic. No breeze picks up her cloak. No harp begins to play. But something does pass between them, a flicker of shared humanness, as if, just for a moment, they were 2 people instead of roles. She looks at him. He looks at the floor. But not before catching her eyes. She says nothing. He says nothing. And that is the entire conversation. A moment later, she walks past him without a word, the scent of rose water trailing behind like punctuation. He exhales only after she's turned the corner. Because of course nothing happens. Nothing can happen. That's the point. He is Thomas. Servant. Linen carrier. Practically furniture in the noble parts of the castle. She is, well, she is someone whose marriage will be arranged based on land, titles, and the ability to pretend all the interesting parts of her soul don't exist. And for a heartbeat, they occupied the same sentence. Now? It's over. Back to roles. Back to routine. But for that flicker of a second? Yeah. If this were 2024, someone would have snapped a blurry photo, filtered it until it looked nostalgic, and captioned it. That one moment you made eye contact with the help and it felt like a 14th century fanfic. Hashtag castle vibes, but this is not Instagram. There are no likes here. Only steps. Thomas keeps walking. By early afternoon, the kitchen has settled into a rhythm, stew simmering, trays prepped, someone yelling about someone else's mistake, all normal. But Thomas isn't in the kitchen right now. He's crouched near the back stairs, sleeves rolled up, holding what might be the worst-smelling bucket in the known universe. Today, it's his turn to scrub the back corridor. And by scrub, we mean, kneel on cold stone, breathe through your mouth, and pretend that whatever seeped into the flagstones last week didn't have a face. He dips the stiff-bristled brush into the mixture, vinegar, water, and ash. Medieval multi-purpose cleaner. Burns your eyes, stings your fingers, and definitely does not spark joy. There's no cute peasant girl humming while she wipes down shelves. No rustic cottagecore aesthetic here. Just grime. And a lot of it. The stones are uneven, worn down by decades of boots, buckets, rats, and secrets. They smell like wet wool, old broth, and something else. Something Thomas has learned not to name. No one tells you this part of castle life. The books always talk about nights and banquets. But those banquets? They happened right here. And no one cleaned up properly. The grease from a roasted boar has seeped into the mortar like a curse. Thomas pushes the brush harder. If this were modern times, someone would have called a biohazard team. Maybe even condemned the whole way. But in 1347? You just get handed a bucket and a prayer. He scrubs. And scrubs. And thinks. He wonders, briefly, what this job would look like now. Probably a passive-aggressive Slack message. Hey Thomas, quick reminder to take care of that floor sludge by end of day, thanks. And a manager with a coffee who has never touched a mop. Here, you don't get emails. You get handed a bucket and told to do it before someone important slips. That's it. Job description over. He wipes his forehead with his sleeve and nearly regrets it. The smell clings. It always does. And the worst part? The castle fights back. No matter how much he scrubs, the grime always wins. It's in the stones. The walls. The air. It's baked in, generations of mess laid like an onion made entirely of disappointment. Still, he keeps going. Because the floor won't clean itself. Because the steward will notice. Because there's something oddly grounding about the repetition. Brush. Dip. Scrub. Shift. Repeat. It's like meditation, if meditation involved elbow grease and mild trauma. He pauses for a second, sitting back on his heels, letting his arms rest. The afternoon light cuts through the arrow-slit window in a pale beam, catching the dust in the air. You wouldn't call it beautiful, exactly, but it's quiet. And in that quiet, Thomas thinks not about escape, or adventure, or dramatic changes. Just about a clean floor. About finishing the job. About dinner. That's enough for now. Later in the day, after the bucket, the brush, and the war on castle grime, Thomas finds himself near the outer courtyard at the washing trough. There are 3 others already there, sleeves rolled, knuckles red from cold. One girl hums to herself between wringing, while an older woman slaps a sheet against the wood with a kind of righteous vengeance. The 4th, a boy with a cracked tooth and a permanent grin, nods at Thomas without saying anything. No one talks much at first. The water is too cold for conversation. Thomas dips a linen towel into the trough. The water bites like it's angry about something. He winces but doesn't stop. The fabric is stiff, probably left too long in the chamber pot basket. He doesn't ask. The trick is to fold it just right, scrub with lye soap, rinse, beat, twist. It's a rhythm. Not unlike kneading bread or scrubbing floors. But wetter. And meaner. He glances up at the others. For once, no one's rushing. This isn't a noble hall. No steward leans over your shoulder here. Just steam rising from the trough and hands moving in silence. There's something strangely comforting in the routine, all of them standing side by side, not friends exactly, but not alone either. You wouldn't call it community, but maybe shared exhaustion with eye contact. And here's something most people today wouldn't guess. Back then, laundry wasn't done every week. Or even every other week. You might wash your outer tunic once a season, maybe twice if it smelled like something crawled into the hem and gave up. Linen undergarments got washed more often, sure, but often meant when they had to. Because lye soap was rough, water was freezing, and laundry wasn't a chore, it was a campaign. A brutal one. One record from a manor household in the 1300s lists only 4 major washing days per year for the whole castle. 4 dozens of people. Suddenly, your once-a-week laundry basket doesn't seem so bad, does it? Thomas plunges the towel again, scrubbing with stiff fingers. Beside him, the girl who hums lifts a soaking shirt and flicks the edge of it toward him. It slaps the side of his arm cold and harmless, and she grins like she didn't do it. He narrows his eyes, feigning offense, then dunks another towel like a challenge. No one laughs out loud. They don't dare. But the corners of mouths twitch. The air softens, even as the wind picks up. For just a minute, it feels like something warm might live between the layers of wool and wet stone. Something like understanding. The linens get cleaner. Their hands go numb. But the hour passes a little easier. Thomas wrings out a soaked undershirt, fingers stiff from cold, arms aching in that way they always do by late afternoon. The shirt isn't really clean, not by any modern standard, but it's cleaner than it was, and that's considered a win. He takes a break, leaning against the low wall behind the trough. The water drips from his elbows onto the packed earth below. And as he sits there, mind drifting the way tired minds do, he wonders not for the first time when he last had a proper bath. It's been a while. A long while. Here's a fun fact no one in the castle would call fun. Back in 1347, bathing was more of an occasion than a habit. For the average servant? Maybe twice a year. Once if you were unlucky. 3 times if something truly offensive had happened. Servants didn't have their own tubs, of course. They'd wash in shallow wooden basins with cold water from the well. The lucky ones got a little warm water added, usually if it was left over from someone important. And soap? If you had lye soap, you were already doing better than most. If you had scented soap, you were definitely stealing it. As for the nobles, yes, they bathed more often. But not daily. Not even weekly. The lord of the manor might have a full-body bath once a month, maybe more if he was feeling particularly generous to his skin. And he didn't bathe himself, of course. That was Thomas's job. Or someone like him. They'd haul hot water from the kitchen in heavy buckets, pour it into a large wooden tub in the lord's private chamber, and then retreat because, well, dignity. And steam. And no one wants to see a baron's toes. Now, the smells? Oh, the smells. People smelled like sweat, smoke, garlic, mutton fat, wool, and fear. There were a lot of layers. Clothes were worn again and again, sometimes over raw skin, sometimes over last week's tunic. The mixture built up over time like a stew you never quite finished cooking. But and this is the best part, people didn't always mind. They believed smells had power. Some believed pleasant smells could keep away disease and evil spirits. That's why nobles stuffed herbs and flowers into their sleeves, collars, and hair. Roses, lavender, marjoram. Basically the medieval version of spritzing half a bottle of Febreze and hoping for the best. Thomas once saw a lady press a clove-studded orange to her nose as she walked through the servant quarters. Didn't even look at him, just floated past like the stench might physically attack her if she breathed normally. Ironically, she probably smelled like goat cheese and old soap herself. But that's the thing about castles, everyone smelled, but only some people got to pretend they didn't. Thomas dips another cloth into the trough and scrubs harder. He doesn't smell bad, exactly. But he definitely doesn't smell good. No one here does. Except maybe the baker, and only right when the bread comes out of the oven. Still, there's something oddly grounding about it all. You learn to smell less, to notice less, to focus on movement, texture, rhythm. One task at a time. One clean-ish cloth after another. He looks over at the girl beside him, who is now wrapping a shirt around a stick to squeeze it dry. She catches his eye, shrugs, and mutters, "Could be worse." And she's right. It could be worse. They could be carrying chamber pots again. He shudders. And goes back to work. By late afternoon, the castle exhales. Not quietly, no. It's more like a rusted hinge or a long sigh after too much wine. But the air changes. Shadows stretch. The kitchen, which had settled into something resembling control, begins to wind up again. Dinner is coming. Thomas returns from the laundry trough with sleeves damp and hands red. He steps into the kitchen and is instantly swallowed by heat. The fires are roaring, pots bubbling, and Hal the cook with one good eye and zero patience is already red-faced and barking about missing turnips and a fish that arrived with too much head and not enough honesty. Someone drops a ladle. Someone else burns their hand. Edda, the girl on spit duty, is crying from onion fumes, but Hal thinks she's crying from guilt and starts shouting about how feelings are for people with finished prep lists. Thomas jumps in without being asked. He lifts a pot that's boiling too hard. He stirs the stew to stop it from burning. He finds the missing cloth, the dry ladle, the spoon no one thought to clean. His body moves before his brain catches up muscle memory forged by repetition and mild terror. It's loud. It's chaotic. It's hot. And still, he does what needs doing. What's strange is that years later when Thomas is older, standing in a very different kitchen with a very different fire, he'll remember this exact moment. Not the words, exactly. Not the smells or the clatter. But the feeling. The strange, overwhelming sense that the world would fall apart if he didn't keep moving. And the way, somehow, it didn't. He'll remember it the way we remember dreams, with softness around the edges, like maybe it happened to someone else. A younger man. In a life that belonged to a version of him that existed before the cottage, before the quiet mornings, before the child who stole the last piece of bread and then kissed his cheek like it was part of the deal. And if you're curious about that Thomas, the one with a roof of his own, who rises when he wants and laughs a little more than he used to, you can meet him. Just scroll back a couple of videos. His story's there, waiting. A slow walk through frost and fields. The same hands, the same breath, just used for something softer. But for now, we're still in the castle. Dinner's not done. The stew still needs salt. And Hal is holding a carrot like it insulted his ancestors. Thomas moves to slice bread. The knives are dull. The air is thick. But the rhythm is steady. And so, he carries on. By the time the bell rings for the evening meal, the castle is glowing. Not warmly. Not like a cottage or a festival. But with that flickering sort of firelight that throws long shadows and makes every stone seem taller than it really is. The great hall smells like roasted meat, dried herbs, and at least 3 perfumes battling for dominance. Candles line the walls. The hearth blazes at full strength, more for show than heat, and the table is set with trenchers, pewter goblets, and the slightly crooked centerpiece someone found in storage and called decorative. Thomas stands at the edge of it all, waiting. This is the part most guests never think about, the stillness before the noise. And then the doors open. Nobles pour in like parade floats. Velvet, fur, feathers. Voices fill the space too fast, laughter arriving before jokes are even finished. One man wears a hat so wide it nearly knocks over a candlestick. A lady sits down and immediately complains about the draft, despite 3 layers of wool, a fur shawl, and the fact that she is seated directly in front of the fire. Thomas moves quietly between them, refilling cups before they are empty, retrieving spoons before anyone notices they've been dropped. He's not invisible. He's unseen. Which is different. At one point, a young lord, maybe 17, maybe drunk, calls him boy, despite Thomas being clearly older. The noble gestures with his spoon like he's giving orders to a general. Thomas nods. Takes the plate. Returns it seconds later with the same stew, just stirred once to look new. The young man thanks him, proudly. Sometimes you win by letting people believe they got their way. There's no real dinner break for the kitchen crew. Just nibbles stolen between rounds. A crust of bread here. A bite of cheese when no one's looking. Thomas takes what he can get, not because he's starving, but because stopping long enough to be hungry feels dangerous. You rest too much, and the ache sets in deeper. You stop moving, and the weight gets heavier. Better to stay in motion. Eventually, the meal ends. Or slows. It's hard to tell. Guests begin to drift away, full and loud, stepping over crumbs and bones like someone else's mess is part of the decor. Which, to be fair, it is. Because someone else will clean it. Thomas sweeps quietly. Collects goblets. Stacks plates that clatter just softly enough to avoid Hal's attention. When the nobles leave, they don't look at him. They're already planning tomorrow. Or their outfits. Or how to insult each other more creatively at breakfast. He finally makes his way back toward the kitchen, then turns to the smaller hearth behind the servants' corridor, not the grand one, not the one for show. This one is for them. It's smaller. The wood is drier. The heat feels more real. Thomas crouches near it. Not too close. Just enough to let the warmth reach his face and maybe his knuckles. He doesn't speak. No one does. Around him, a few others gather, shoulders hunched, boots off, spoons in hand. They eat the same stew they served. It tastes better when you don't have to rush. No one talks about the nobles. Or the fire. Or the shoes that pinched. Instead, they share quiet, not as a lack of noise, but as a kind of agreement. We made it through another day. Thomas lets his shoulders drop, just slightly. He still smells like soap and turnips. His knees ache. His hands are stiff. But the fire crackles. And the castle, for the first time all day, feels almost still. The stew Thomas eats by the hearth is fine. It's thick, slightly oversalted, and filled mostly with turnips, barley, and a few unidentifiable herbs someone swore were good for digestion. There might be a shred of meat in there. Or maybe that was yesterday. Still, it's hot. It's filling. It's better than nothing. Which is a phrase that sums up most of the meals served to servants in castles like this one. Here's something the tapestries don't tell you. In a medieval castle, food was deeply tied to status, not just what you ate, but when, how, and with whom. The nobles dined early, with ceremony and song, often in 2 sittings per day, one around midday, the other in the late afternoon. Meats, pies, wine, white bread, and spices that cost more than most shoes. The servants? They ate after. Always after. Not at the same table, not with the same bread, and never with the same speed. By the time Thomas gets his bowl, the fires have cooled, the crumbs have hardened, and the dogs have already picked through the leftovers. And no one's handing out napkins. Now here's where things get interesting. In a modern restaurant, a high-end one, let's say, the staff often eats together before service. It's called a family meal. Cooks, servers, dishwashers, the whole crew. They sit. They eat. They hydrate. They prep for the rush. They don't get foie gras. But they do get fed. And often well. It's one of the few moments in hospitality where the hierarchy briefly flattens, where the people serving the food are allowed to be people. But in Thomas's world? That wasn't the case. The hierarchy was sharper than the carving knives. The lords feasted, the priests blessed, and the servants waited. Waited to serve. Waited to clean. Waited to eat. Even their food reflected their place: heavy, plain, practical. Designed to keep you upright. Not to give you joy. Still, even in the dark corners of the castle, even in bowls that came secondhand, there were quiet victories. Shared smiles. A stolen onion. A crust of bread traded for gossip. They weren't part of the feast. But they made the feast happen. And somehow, that was enough to keep them going. Most days. The fire is nearly out now. Just a single ember glowing like an eye beneath the ash. The kind that watches, not moves. The room is still. The kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion. A quiet built from bodies that have nothing left to give. Thomas lies awake not out of restlessness, just habit. He's always the last to drift off. And in that space between waking and sleep, a thought passes. Not quite hope. No, that would be too clean. Too golden. Hope is a thing for people with land, or letters, or certainty. But Thomas has something else. He watches. He remembers. And he plans in that quiet, under-the-skin way that doesn't look like ambition, but is. Most of the servants here are paid in meals, shelter, and not much more. A few get coin, a handful of pennies a year, maybe handed out by the steward like winter grain, tightly, and always with an explanation about costs. Some earn favors. A heavier blanket. A half day off on a holy day. A crust of white bread instead of rye. Payment, in castle terms, is rarely about money. It's about survival. And Thomas has survived well. But more than that, more than bread and boots and not being scolded, is noticing things. Like how the steward always keeps 2 keys hidden in his belt, but never uses one. Like how the nobles speak when they think no one's listening. Like how ink smells when it's fresh, and how quickly wax seals melt if you angle them near the oven vent. He can't read. Not yet. He's never held a quill. But he knows what reading looks like. And he remembers, clear as daylight, that one morning months ago when the scribe dropped a scroll near the back stairs. Thomas picked it up before anyone saw. Held it. Touched the edge. Saw the curve of the letters. Couldn't make sense of the shapes, but somehow, he knew they meant everything. The scroll smelled like dust and oil and wax and something else, power, maybe. He handed it back, silently. The scribe didn't thank him. But later that night, when the castle was quiet, Thomas found a piece of coal and scratched one of the shapes he remembered into the back of a wood plank in the stables. Just to see if he could. He doesn't know the name of the letter. But he remembers the curve. And it's still there, under the dust, waiting. Among the dozen servants sleeping in that room, only one of them will leave with more than memories. Not because he's stronger. Or braver. But because he watches. Because he listens. Because he dares to imagine a life that isn't just the next trench, the next stew, the next scraped floor. And that kind of daring, the quiet kind, is harder to kill than hope.